Hi, I'm Cheryl and welcome to my sewing room. I'm going to demonstrate how to put a double strip border onto a quilt with squares up in the corners. So let's take a look at a sample of what I mean by that. Now I know a lot of you who are beginners and you know how to put all your squares together. You know you need to put a border on it, but you're not quite sure what you need to do. What I like about borders is they expand the size of your quilt without having to do a whole bunch of little squares all over the place. So it's a simple way of making your quilt larger. So here's my pretend quilt right in here, all these little squares. And on each end, I have 2 strips of fabric with squares in the corners. Okay, so let's go over how to put this together. So the first thing you want to look at is determine the shape of your quilt. If your quilt is a rectangle, in other words, you've got 2 sides that are longer than the other 2 sides, that's a rectangle. So you're going to measure the 2 longest sides opposite of each other. And once you get that measurement, then I want you to add 1 inch to that length. And that's going to be the length of your strips you need to cut. Okay? Now, if you have a square quilt, you need to measure 2 opposite sides of each other. And then add 1 inch to that. Now, one of the things you need to be aware of, and maybe some of you have already figured that out, that not all your sides always all come out exactly the same. They may be off 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. So that's why it's important to measure each side separately and cut your strips accordingly. By the way, if you have not squared up and cleaned up your edges before putting the border on, you're going to have issues. So make sure you cut your edges straight, clean up any jagged areas before you put a border on. Okay, so now that you've determined how long you need to make your strips, then of course you need to decide how wide to cut them. Now, your strips can be the same width or different widths. That's up to you. I'm just working with 2.5 inch wide strips, which is going to give me a 4.5 inch wide border. So whatever the finished size of your strips stitched together is going to be the size of your squares in each corner. So because these are 2.5 inch strips, once I stitch them together, they're going to be 4.5 inches. So then your square up in your corners are going to be 4.5 inches squared. 4.5 by 4.5. All right, so take your strips. Once you've determined what size you want them, bring right sides together and then stitch them together 1/4 inch seam. Then press the strips on this back side here. Then unfold your strips and press on top. And make sure that your seam is all going in the same direction, that not part of it's going one way and the other half's going another way. Make sure it's all in the same direction and give it a nice, good pressing. Then remember, you're working on 2 sides without the square right now. All right, we're not working with a square at the moment. So take your 2 strips that are stitched together and place them on the longest edge of your quilt. And if you'll notice, I have some fabric hanging out past the edge. You want that. So at each end, have extra fabric hanging out. That's why I had you cut your strips longer. Then go ahead and pin this down and stitch 1/4 inch along here. Then press. Then unfold it and press again. Now, make sure this seam is going away from the quilt top, the center of the quilt. All right, press. Then go to the opposite side and put that one on also. Now you need to clean up the edges here. We want to trim these corners so they're nice and straight. So take your ruler and you're going to line up the edge of your ruler here along the edge of your quilt top, your squares, and place it on there. And once you've got it lined up, then you're going to trim off those corner areas with your rotary cutter. And then go to the other side and trim those two corners off. Now you want to turn your quilt over onto the back. And now you're going to measure from the edge of your quilt top, not your border. Don't measure from the border. Measure from the edge of this quilt top to the other edge over here. All right? And then you're going to cut your strips. Make sure they're already stitched together first. Cut your strips exactly that length. Whatever it is, even if it's 20 1/8, you're going to cut it that length, whatever it is. Then take your strip. Remember, your squares are cut, whatever the width of this is. Take your squares and lay them face down onto that double border fabric. And then stitch 1/4 inch along here on both ends. Then unfold, and then, then press. Go to your ironing board and press. Then open it up to the front. Have your square down on the table. Lift this border fabric up, and with your iron, you're going to push against this seam and press. And you're going to push this seam out and away towards the border fabric, and then go to the other end and do the same thing. So your seams are coming in towards this border fabric. So now take your quilt piece, and here's the border. You're going to bring it face down on top. Now you're going to line these seams up, lock them in. Make sure that the seam on the bottom is going in the opposite direction than the one on top. And go ahead and place pins there, getting it in. Then go to the next one and do the same thing. Lock it in. Then you want to, I'm going to turn this, you're going to stitch 1/4 inch all along here. Then press this seam on the back side. Unfold and press on top. Then go to the other end and do the last row. And then you're done. Let me show you a sample of one that I've been working on, which I think is just so pretty. This is a wall hanging that I'm making, and I've got 2 different sizes of border fabric here. And then up in my square, I decided after I put this square up here that I wanted something else, and I decided to put a little applique that went with the flowers in this wall hanging that I'm making. So you have options for this corner. You can put a plain square, which will still look nice, or maybe do a half square triangle, or a 4-patch, or even do this little applique pattern. And if you're interested in learning more about applique, this is machine applique. It's really simple. Click on the link in the upper right hand corner. So you have a lot of options by adding a little bit more width and length to your quilt and adding a lot more personality. Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope you try to put borders on your quilts. Now, if you want to know more about what the Sewing Room channel has, we have over 100 sewing tutorials, and most of them are for beginners. So if you want to learn more about quilting enter in the YouTube search window the Sewing Room channel, and it will take you to our homepage listing like all of the videos. I think the last count was like 112, and I'm sure it's more than that now. So once you click on that, you can see all of the other areas you can learn about. Now, if you want to keep informed on all my future videos, click on one of my subscribe buttons. There's one down there in the lower right hand corner, one in the upper left hand corner. It's a round picture of my face. Click on either one of those. YouTube's going to prompt you for your email address. Enter that information, and the next time I have a new video, YouTube sends you a brief email. You click on it and it'll take you directly to my latest video. I'm Cheryl, and I'm really glad you came to my sewing room. I'll see you next time, and happy sewing.